Boker Tov, good morning everyone, and Shavua Tov. Yesterday on Shabbat Hagadol, there's a custom to start reading the Haggadah. And of course, Wednesday night, we'll all be sitting and reading and studying the Haggadah. When we come to the four children, it says there are four children. Echad Chacham, one is wise. Echad Rasha, one is wicked. Echad Tam, one is simple. And Echad She'eni Yodei L'Shol, one does not even know how to ask a question. And the question is, why does each one of the four sons have to be introduced with the word Echad? One is wise, one is wicked, one is simple, one cannot ask a question. Why doesn't it just say there are four children, Chacham, Rasha, Tam, and She'eni Yodei L'Shol? I'm reminded of a story about this teacher who came to speak to the principal of the school, and he said to the principal, there's this one student in my class, he's always making trouble, he's not following along, he's not behaving, he's not keeping up. I would like you to take him out of my class. He's a disturbance for the rest of the class. And the principal said to the teacher, I want you to imagine that you only had one student in your class, this one and only student. And if you kick this student out of your class, effectively you no longer have a job in the school because you have no more students in your class. Would you still ask me to take this student out of your class if it would mean that you would lose your job? And the message the principal was conveying to the teacher is the same message of the Haggadah. The way we should look at every child is echad, that they are the only one and only child. They're indispensable because there are no other children in your classroom. Or if you have many children, imagine you only have one child. This is your only child. The only reason you are a parent is because you have this one child. Or imagine that you looked at every friend as the only friend you had. Or every member of your community is the only member of the community. That is the way we should look at one another. One of the things this pandemic has done is it has taken us from I-centered to we-centered. When this all started, people were running to the supermarkets and grabbing more supplies than they need, more toilet paper than they need. It was all about I, self-preservation. I need to take care of myself. And now, as this has gone on for 2 or 3 weeks now, we see that people are letting go of the echad being I and the echad being the other. How can I help others? And I've seen this so dramatically this past week, and specifically with something that happened that, again, in 26 years in the rabbit, I've never seen this happen before. One of our members reached out and said, Rabbi, are there people who don't have meals for Shabbat dinner? I would like to sponsor meals for anyone who needs Shabbat dinner in their home, who cannot go out and get Shabbat dinner or needs some food. I'm happy to sponsor that. And sure enough, we sent out an email on Thursday evening, and by Friday morning, we had close to 100 requests for Shabbat dinners. And all day Friday, we were delivering Shabbat meals to close to 100 of our members. And once again, it shows us that this is bringing out, in some ways, the best of human nature. And we are turning to our deeper sense of self and saying, is it all about me or is it about caring for one another? We are going from I to we. At the Seder on Wednesday night, there are 4 things that are very unique about the Seder. The first thing that's very unique about the Seder meal, different than any other meal of the year, is that it's all focused on the children. No other meal begins with children asking questions. In the night of Seder, it's all about the children asking the questions. The second thing that's unique about the Seder meal is that we have to eat the matzah and the maror, the commemorational matzah that the Jews ate when they left slavery, and the bitter herbs to remember the bitter times. The third thing that's unique about the Seder is that we have to have 4 cups of wine. And finally, the last thing that's very unique about the Seder is that no other meal of the year do we finish with the 3 words, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. Next year may we be in Jerusalem, which today doesn't just mean getting on a plane and going to Israel for Pesach. It means in the rebuilt, free Jerusalem. And the question is, why do we do these 4 unique things? And here we find the truth of life. The truth of life is that anything that comes easy in life, unfortunately, is not always appreciated and not always seen in its full value, but rather it's taken for granted because it came easy. There was no effort exerted. However, when someone has to struggle or strive to receive something, it remains with them the value and the preciousness and the gratitude for what they have and what they've received. And if you look at the Jewish people, you see there are 4 things that were hard fought for and one. The first thing is children. All of our patriarchs and matriarchs, if you go back to the book of Genesis, had great difficulty having children. But that is precisely why we are the most child-oriented religion. That is why Jewish education, V'shinantam levanecha, you should teach your children Torah. V'yigadat levincha, you should tell your children the night of Passover. The children ask the 4 questions. We focus on children in Judaism perhaps more than any other faith or religion. Why? Because we understand how precious and valuable children are. We are very child-centered and oriented as a people. It's all about the children because we know what a blessing children is, because it was hard fought for. It came through pain, through struggle, through difficulty at the very inception of our nationhood. And therefore the first Jewish child to ever be born, which was Isaac, is called Yitzchak, which means laughter, because of the great immense joy it brought, because it came at such an old age to Abraham and Sarah. The second thing we do that's unique on the night of Passover is we drink 4 cups of wine. If King David says in the book of Psalms, Psalm 23, Gam ki elech b'geitz al mavet, as I walk through the valley of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. If there's ever been a nation that has walked more through the valley of death, it's the Jewish people. The Jewish people have been persecuted throughout the centuries, throughout the millenniums. But that is precisely why we cherish life so much. That's why in every Jewish occasion, the first thing we do is raise a glass and say, L'chaim, to life. We always celebrate life. We wear a chai around our necklace sometimes to symbolize chai, l'chaim. We celebrate and cherish every moment of life because we know the value of life, because life was always in such short supply for the Jewish people, tragically. And that is why on the night of Seder we have not 1 l'chaim, not 2, not 3, but 4 cups of wine, because tonight is the night we celebrate the value and the preciousness and the gift of life. The third thing is freedom. The Jewish people have not had freedom throughout the millenniums. We were always the minority in every nation. Our freedoms and our rights were always taken away from us. We were always persecuted. And because freedom came through so much struggle, especially at our very inception when we left Egypt after hundreds of years of slavery, we perhaps value freedom, not just our freedom, but the freedom of every person more than any other nation. And this freedom has really been manifested now in our generation when we were fortunate to come back to the land of Israel and have our own nationality, our own sovereignty, our own nation, our own country, and provide freedom not just for ourselves, but for every person living in the land of Israel. And we pray, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, may this freedom be completed with the coming of Mashiach and the return of the Jewish people to Israel, when all of mankind will be free, because we understand how precious freedom is, because it was taken from us time and again. And that is why, my friends, we eat the matzah and the maror, because the beauty of Passover is that here we are 3,000 years after the experience, and we still remember its lessons and still teach our children the lessons of Passover. When the Jews left Egypt, the first thing Moses said is, don't build a big monument for me as a big hero that I am, or don't have a big parade, a victory parade for going out of Egypt. What's important is that you teach your children the values and the lessons of what you learned. And the biggest miracle is that 3,300 years later, we're still telling the story, still learning the lessons that power could corrupt, that no human being should ever dominate and control another human being, that every human being deserves their freedom, that every human being is created in the image of God. These are the lessons we teach our children from the youngest and earliest of age. Unlike the one who said that the only thing we've learned from history is that we haven't learned much from history, Jewish people continue to learn from history every single day, and especially on the holiday of Passover. And I think this is the most important lesson of the times we're in. Will we learn the lessons of this time, and will we carry it forward? When this is over, will we have become more sensitized people? Will we focus not just on the echad, the I, but see the one uniqueness in every single human being? Will we see how every person is one and only in the eyes of God and should be so in the eyes of our fellow man? Will we realize that even though our fellow man may not be created in our image, they're created in the image of God, and therefore they are echad, they are one and only? Will we see the uniqueness and the blessing of each and every person? Will we be able to go from the I-centeredness to the we-centeredness? And if we can, and we learn that, then this will have been a wonderful teaching experience. And we will carry the remembrance of this, just like we carry the remembrance of our ancestors, for many, many years to come, for even generations to come, as we will pass on the lessons of this experience, not just to ourselves, but to our children, our grandchildren, and God willing for many, many years, and we will be better, more selfless people as a result of this. Conclude with the story told about a certain country that the king died, and they selected a simple farmer who they decided that he should be the next king. And although he was simple, he was very wise, and they felt that he was the most befitting new king. And they went to his farm, and they took him in his overalls and his straw hat, and took him in the royal palace to the king's palace. They took him into the inner chambers. They groomed him, brought him new royal clothing, and placed him on the throne. And when they did that, they took his old farmer clothing, his work boots and his overalls and his jeans and his hat, and they threw it in a bag. And he said, "Where are you going with that?" And they said, "We're going to throw it out. You're never going to need this again. You're a king for life. You're going to have royal tailored garments." And he said, "Do me a favor, don't dispose of it. Put it out in the back house." And so they obeyed his commandment, because after all, he was the king. And then they noticed that every year on the anniversary of the day he became the king, he would leave the palace, and nobody knew where he was. And so one year they followed him, and they saw him go into that back house. And they peered through the window, and in the window they saw him go inside this back house, disrobe from his royal garments, and put on his old farmer garments. And he would spend time sitting in his old garments. And so when he came out, they confronted him, and they said, "Why did you take off your royal garments, and why did you put on your old farmer garments?" And he said, "I'll tell you why." He said, "I was a hard-working farmer. I worked under the heat of the sun, 8-10 hours a day. And now I was risen up to power, to wealth, to kingship. But I want to always remember my life before I became a king. So I could never forget my plight when I was a simple farmer, working back-breaking labor every day in the fields. So I always remain a compassionate and a sympathetic and empathetic king, always feeling the plight of every single citizen of my country, even the simple farmer way out in the field, who may not have no voice, who may not have no power. And I want to remain that caring and loving king who understands the plight of each and every individual." And that is the lesson of Passover. We were taken out of slavery, and we became the Jewish nation. We were raised up from slavery, not only to freedom, but to becoming a kingdom, a nation of kings and priests. But however, every year on Passover, like the farmer, we put on our old clothing. We eat the matzah, we eat the maror, the bitter herbs. We dip our food in the salt water to remember the tears of the Jews. So we never lose our humanity. We never forget that every human being has a voice. Every human being should be heard and understood and responded to and cared for. And that's why we find that in the Torah there's one commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. But there are 36 commandments where the Torah says, care for the widow, for the orphan, for the vulnerable, for the downtrodden, for the weak. Why? Because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. It's the lessons, the precious lessons we learned in Egypt that we carry with us today and make us the nation we are. And hopefully as an American nation, as a global nation, as human beings, as communities, we will take the lessons of the time we're in and carry it forward with us. I want to just conclude by saying that today is the 11th day of Nisan, which would have been the 118th birthday of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. There was one person I knew in my life who understood the uniqueness and the value of every human life and every human being, who cared deeply for every single human being, who understood that echad, there is only one of each and every one of us, and every one of us is like an only child in the eyes of God, and we have to do everything we can to help every human being. There was one person who gave every person the undivided attention and made them feel like they were the only person in the universe. That was the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And so may the inspiration of today and the inspiration of Passover and the inspiration from the times we're living through take us from I to we, that let us understand that we are all one. We are all echad. We are all echad in the eyes of God, and we are all echad in the eyes of each other. When we treat each other with that love and that respect and that dignity and that kindness and that compassion and empathy, then we will emerge from this confinement that we find ourselves in. Mitzrayim means confinement, Meitzar, and we will go into expansiveness, into freedom, not just physical freedom from our confinement of our homes, but emotional, psychological, and spiritual freedom as well. Shavua Tov, wishing you love and blessings, health and happiness. Please stay safe. Continue to pray for all those in need. And may we hear good news very soon. Shavua Tov.